Okay, status is often still a thing. People come out of these groups, they're very insecure. Status is, the hierarchy within the cult is generally something that the person lived their entire life around. They wanted to move up in status. They wanted to get closer to the cult leader, whether that was through intense belief, whether that was through trance meditation, whether that was through joining staff and then the Sea Org in Scientology, moving up the ladder, going up the bridge to total freedom in Scientology, moving up the OT levels. There's tons of status connected with that. People define themselves by that status. And when they come out of those groups, that status no longer means anything. No one in the big wide world cares what OT level you did. They don't. Nobody cares. It doesn't mean anything to anybody. But you invested hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of dollars in it. So it sure means a lot to you. And you're still very aware of that status even after coming out of the group. Nobody comes out of these groups and says, oh, well, none of it meant anything. It's all fine. I don't care anymore, and I'll just drop it. I've not seen one person ever able to just brush it all off like that. Usually it's a lot harder. And that status button is a big part of it, because then when lacking that status, there's a lot of insecurity. There's also a lot of effort to maintain being right about the decisions and actions that the person engaged in, because who wants to look back at all that time and go, well, every single part of it was wrong. Every single part of it wasn't wrong, but sifting out what was right and what was wrong takes a lot of time and a lot of work. And when you first come out of these groups and are first wrestling with this stuff, it is difficult to sort out what is right and wrong, what's important and what's not. You're between two worlds. You were in one bubble world of cultic belief, and now you're back out in the real world where all the values are upside down and all the importances are upside down. So this is something that a lot of people coming out of these groups struggle with. There are also a lot of remnants of us versus them thinking. People coming out of these groups tend to be, they're prone to take sides very easily and go to extreme ends. It's kind of all or nothing thinking. And this really can actually, even in regards to the cult, they can have an extreme idea now where they come out and everything about it is hateful and wrong and bad and horrible. And every single thing that they ever did that ever had anything to do with it was totally wrong. And it was all just vicious lies and nothing but abuse. And you have to wonder at that moment, well, wait a second. Why were you there for so long then, right? Because very, very few of these situations involve physical imprisonment. Generally speaking, people are gradually fed, indoctrinated into these groups. And when they come out of it, there's a whole lot of this culture shock and other shock. But they were in it because it did something positive and good and useful for them. However small, however meaningless now, at the time, it meant something because they gave over more of themselves to the group and more of themselves and more of themselves. So people don't do that because they're, being beat on or because they know they're being lied to or because they're being harmed. They do it because they feel that there's some benefit being involved in this. So coming out, you'll tend to see some people go extreme other end. And, it was all white before, now it's all black. Right? And that kind of thinking is not just around the cult. It tends to, pervade their entire life. So they can be kind of extreme about some things, and they can get quite upset at other people who are not also at the same level of extremism. The fact of the matter is that it for me, and I've seen it with others, but again, I'm not saying that this is universal. I'm not saying everybody experiences this, but a lot of people do. You come out, you've been at one extreme end of a spectrum, and so you kind of slide over to the other extreme end, and there's some catharsis there. But if you stay over there, that can become its own extremist problem. So people tend to, over time, slide back more towards the middle as they start realizing that, oh, well, there were some good things, or, well, there was some stuff about this that wasn't really that bad, or at least I can understand now why I got involved with it, because it looked good and it felt good and it seemed good, but, well, I can see now that it wasn't. And they, but the initial shock and freak out and upsets, those tend to, fade over time, as they should. So you kind of move towards the middle, but being more in the middle, or being, not quite on these extreme ends, can be very difficult, because other people who are fresh out of these groups, or other people who have not yet sort of toned down their thinking, or are still over at that, it was all white, now it's all black, they'll target those people who kind of move toward the middle. That'll happen, right? And that's uncomfortable and difficult and problematic often on relationships amongst the X community. Then, oh yeah, you even get this. You get folks in the X world who get mad at other people in the X world because they're not saying the right things, or doing the right things, or acting in the right way towards the cult, right? Meaning they're not in full, Bill is pissed off at Joe because Joe won't go to a protest, or Joe won't go give an interview, or Joe won't say that L. Ron Hubbard was the most evil man who ever existed, right? Well, you're still brainwashed. You're still in the cult, right? You'll get this kind of thing going on. This happens a lot, way more than it should.